This is a general idea of what I would review for incoming first, second, and third graders. Obviously, there's difference in those grade levels, but for all of them, I would be reviewing our numerals, how and why we group at the 10. I would be reviewing place value. You don't necessarily need to know or utilize the terms place and value, but the idea, that, of course, that we have a ones place that, have the value of 1 unit. Each one there, in terms of the numerals, are worth 1. And then we're talking about sets of 10, and the numerals are representing groups of 10. And then, of course, for those older grades we're talking about, we could be talking about groups of 100, and that we group when we get to the 10. I'd also review reading numbers and noting that the teen numbers are read backwards. That's a big hang up, particularly for students who have learning disabilities, understanding that that's an important thing I'm going to cover here in a minute. Also, I would review how to read fractions. A lot of students still forget to read half as 1/2. They call it 1/2, so I really think we need to reinforce that. And finally, operation symbols and names, reviewing the plus sign, saying this means add, and going over those terms and those symbols again. So those are some of the basics things that I would review at the beginning of each year. In terms of some tips I have with regarding that and going over symbols, one thing I'd really emphasize is that 0, that when we count, first of all, that we have 10 symbols, we have 10 numerals, right? And why do we have 10 numerals? I think that's always a fun discussion to have with kids, and to talk about the fact that we have 10 fingers. But interestingly, while we have 10 fingers, 0 is not one of the ones that we are looking at when we're looking at our fingers, because 0 is nothing, it's no quantity, right? So that 10 is actually made of the numerals 0 and 1, right? And so isn't that interesting, and why would that be? So that in some ways, 9, we don't think about it, but 9 is our biggest numeral, right? It is our highest numeral. So if we think of somebody climbing up a tower, and they're on the ground at 0, and then they start climbing up to 1, 2, 3, 4, and they keep going. When they hit their limit, that limit is 9, right? And then they can't go any further. So they have to start over, and that means there's going to be 0 in here, and then they're going to have to be 1 here. So emphasis on that 9, that's when we run out of numerals. And compare that to the alphabet, where we have 26 uppercase letters and 26 lowercase letters. So I like to have this discussion of how many numerals we have, and how 9 is really the highest one we get to, and 10 is made up, which we often think of because we're grouping at that point, but 10 is that combination of 0 and 9. So that's an important discussion I have to set that framework for the idea that we have a base 10 system based on groups of 10. So again, the how and why we group at the 10, I think, is an important discussion. I have place value mats that are based on having base 10 blocks. One thing that is really helpful, again, for students who need the concrete, for the CRA method, for concrete to representational to abstract, is for those who are using base 10 blocks, I get these 1 centimeter cubes. You can get a whole collection of them from Amazon. And I use these because you can actually utilize them to create them. They're the exact same size of the rods that they use in the base 10 blocks, and you can use 10 of them to make a hundreds flat. So these are useful. I also, with my multisensory math training, used a lot of craft sticks. And sometimes I would use them and put magnets on them if I didn't have a document camera. And when I would have a place value mat, where I would have some with magnets, because I could put them attach them to the board. And I would have them again so I could bundle at the 10 and I could take away at the 10 and I could use them to look like tally marks. And I would do things like, okay, we got to 9, we can't have more than one numeral here, so when we're at the 9, we're going to bundle and make a 10, right? And there we're counting by groups of 10. I'd also talk about why do we do this. The idea that our hands are getting so full, similar to the grocery store. I would take these, I would have them hold pom-poms, and once they would try to hold them in a hand, I'd put them over in a baggie, and they would start collecting baggies. Once they had 9, I'd put them in baggies, and then they would start carrying 1 baggie, 2 baggie, 3 baggies, and then they would go up to 10 baggies when we put them in a bigger bag. So the idea that it is helpful and efficient to start counting them in larger groups, and that's part of the reasoning behind that larger grouping and counting them in bundles of 10 and then bundling again at the 10. So understanding, again, explaining of grouping at that 10, but also tying that back to that each place in a number is dealing with different value, and really talking about value and quantity and breaking down that word. What does it mean if something's valuable, and talking that through with that explicit instruction of the terms we are using. And in terms of, I want to go back to the teen numbers, one thing it was important for my students, particularly again, those who are struggling with language and reading numbers and writing numbers, one thing I really talked about, made sure to emphasize with them, even in kindergarten, we would talk about, because they had to learn how to read their teen numbers. And actually that's tricky because the teens are the odd men out. When we read 35, 3 10s, 5 1s, what's its name? 35. And then we read, 2 10s, 5 1s, what's its name? 25, right? And we go 95, 75, all of them reading in this direction. And yet when we get down to the teens, suddenly we might think, why can't I read in this direction? We're used to reading. My mom is 35, my dad is, 45, this direction. But suddenly we go 15, and 15, teen being 10. So that's another piece of information, that teen meaning 10, and fifth, not even 15. Whereas 14, we are actually saying 14, and 17, we're saying 7, and 18, we're saying 8. But 15, we say fifth, and 13, we don't say 3-teen, we say 13. So that being awkward, talking through 12, being 12 is just 1, and we touch it. What's it made out of? 1 10, 2 1s, and its name is 12. And I would talk about 12, the tw, and related to 20, related to twice. And then I would often bring up the idea that we spell the word twoo, and maybe we used to say twoo because that W is there and it's connected to 20 and 12 and twice. So maybe we used to say twoo. And then of course we'd go to 11, and then we'd go to 10, right? So 1 10 and 0 1s. So that review of reading those numbers. Reading fractions, again, this would be without a place value mat, or you could get a fraction place value mat, but with those shapes and with, having them read, and we would build this, and I would say I have 1 out of 4 pieces, its name is 1/4. I have 2 out of 4 pieces, its name is 2/4. I have 1 out of 2 pieces that make up the whole, its name is 1/2. So getting them, what's it's made of, what's its name, that's an important piece. And then finally those symbols, and talking about the terms that are related to those symbols. So this means plus, it also means add, it can also relate to the sum, right? So going over those terms, or I think all those things are important when we're getting back into thinking about the basis of all the operations and all the numbers that they should know coming into your classroom, and just getting them thinking in that numeracy mindset. Thank you so much.